It usually starts that way in a horror story. Hello and welcome to week 2 of Obsidian Murders. This week I'll be reading chapters 3 and 4. Last week I read chapter 1 and 2 and talked a little bit about the author, Nicole Brona. Last week we met our main character, Tessa O'Hara. She's hoping to be a full-time journalist. She does work at the Bethesda newspaper. But, as many of us who have been to school know, the time between finishing school and your dream job takes a bit of time. So Tessa is wanting to do serious journal pieces. She's been offered a job as the advice and gossip columnist, not something she's thrilled about, but as Barbara Shear from Refuse to Choose would say, it's that good enough job that pays the bills, benefits, and keeps food on the table. So, yes, Tessa took that job. We also learned that Tessa is not your average human. She's able to see beings from the other world. She has an office fairy known as Drusel, who tends to create a fair bit of chaos and other adventure in her work life. And at the end of chapter 2, she had seen a vampire walk into her favorite coffee shop. She was on the phone talking to her mom about career choices, and when she went to meet the vampire, he was gone. I love that her mom makes the point of don't judge just because he's a vampire. You've met other beings from the other world and it went well, so go talk to him and meet him. This week, chapter 3. I didn't want to get out of bed on Saturday morning, but I had things to do and people to see. And the ghost living in my coat closet wouldn't stop rattling the broom handle against the wall. George, I swear to the gods I'll kick your invisible ass. I tossed the duvet off and nudged open the bedroom door with my hip, eyeing the door next to my dining room. I had a one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment with only 800 square feet to my name. It didn't take long to scurry across the apartment in my lime green pajamas and yank open the door, revealing a tall, see-through man with black eyes, slick-back brown hair, and a crisp black suit standing before me. What did I say about rattling the broom so early in the morning? It's not for the reason you think this time, George said. I wrapped my arms around my rib cage, trying to keep warm. Please tell me what you mean before I freeze to death. George tilted his head. That would be an unpleasant death. Is it as unpleasant as being dosed with rat poison by your cheating wife? No, that was rather tragic, George sniffed, remembering. Okay, then what is it? I can feel activity. Of what nature, I'm not sure, happening near the otherworldly portal. Something isn't right. The one across the street from us? George nodded and headed towards the dining room's small window. I followed and opened the blinds for us to get a better look. Unlike what many ghost investigators would tell you, spirits don't float above the floor. They can pass through any man-made object they wanted to after a couple of decades of practice, and they can easily walk around this dimension as any normal person would, except silently, mostly. George's footsteps were almost always quiet, unless he thought he needed to be heard to detract any intruders from sticking around for too long. He also moaned in pain whenever he thought someone was trying to break in, which added a flair of mystery and horror to my free anti-theft protection plan. When the blinds were all the way open, my eyes widened in fear. That can't be. Wait, is it? I whispered, hoping it wasn't what I suspected it to be. George leaned forward, sticking his head through the glass to get a closer look. He pulled himself back into the apartment with a sad expression and said, "She's dead." That poor woman, I whispered. Do you think she'll haunt the place? George shrugged. Only if the death was traumatic, and if she has unfinished business to attend to. We can check off traumatic death without a doubt. I'm calling that, I began, but cut myself off when I heard sirens in the distance. How long do you think her body's been out in the open? George crossed his arms. Not too long. I must have sensed her soul leaving her body and believed it to be the portal acting up. There hasn't been a murder in Bethesda for years, I said. George was silent for a moment before saying, Are you going to report on it for your newspaper? Is that something you do? Why in the world would you ask about that at a time like this? She's barely cold, George. What? I've been dead for 52 years. This is not new to me. Death is 22 years new to me, I muttered, biting at a hangnail that had been bugging me for a month. I watched as 4 police cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance arrived at the scene. 6 officers immediately jumped out of their patrol cars, ushering a handful of men and women that were gathering around the area out of the way so the other officers could assess the scene. A few minutes passed by before I saw a young officer hurry to a patrol car and yank open the door to call dispatch. I knew they'd send over homicide detectives immediately, especially in such a pleasant neighborhood. I opened the blinds further, revealing a growing group of concerned neighbors to the right of the patrol, near the front entrance of the apartment complex. Other worldly portals were everywhere, set up in random places for other beings to travel between the mortal dimension and what they call the other world. But sometimes other beings didn't like the other world and preferred living among humans. It was extremely rare and dangerous for a human to travel to the other world, but like all the myths and legends, humans had traveled back and forth for thousands of years, willingly or not. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, trying to quell the uneasiness beginning to bubble in my chest. The officers calling for detectives and forensics, no doubt. I don't smell a lot of blood. Perhaps it's a magical killing, George muttered, his eyebrows crinkled in thought. You can smell her from so far away? Being a spirit has some advantages. I side-eyed him. Is that what you're telling yourself nowadays? I feel like there's no hope for me to cross over, so I may as well embrace the positives of being dead. And there's a lot, so don't feel bad for me, like what I know you're doing right now. I know that look, George accused, though not unkindly. I've helped dozens of spirits cross over. I can help you too, whenever you're ready, I whispered. Every spirit I'd ever encountered believed the same thing as George. But eventually, with a lot of care and time, they eventually crossed over. I just had to be patient. George lit up with an unknown emotion, but the look in his eyes made my heart ache. And leave you all alone? I don't think so. Not soon, at least. You're the best resident I've had the pleasure haunting. I stifled a chuckle, knowing he was being genuine. Thank you, George. You're welcome. The previous woman that lived here with her 6 cats was the worst. He trailed off, remembering horror stories unknown to me. I didn't want to know. If he said they were bad, they were terrible. We fell silent, watching as 2 unmarked black cars arrived, along with a white van that held everything you needed for a forensic sweep. I tilted my head at the last man to step out of the second unmarked car. He was dressed in an outfit out of a 1930s mystery movie. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat that touched his ankles, black leather gloves, and on his nose was a dollop of white zinc sunblock, that one often sees extremely pale people wear at the beach to avoid sunburn in the summer. Why the hell is that detective wearing sunscreen in the middle of a depressingly wintry day? I asked, my face twisted in confusion. That's not a human. Can't you feel it? My eyes widened as the officer turned around and looked up, revealing his face. "It's the vampire I told you about last night." George scratched the side of his face. Since vampires can glamour their victims into thinking whatever they wish, I'm not surprised he's on the scene. "Well, you were right about this being a magical killing. If it's near an otherworldly portal, it's always a magical killing." "I wonder what happened, and who killed her. Was it a human or an immortal? I just A killing like this in Bethesda?" I asked. "You could always ask the vampire if you see him in the coffee shop next time you're in. While he's here working the case, that might be his go-to coffee shop for the foreseeable future." "I'll do that," I replied, uneasy at the thought of not only speaking to the vampire in question, but discovering why he was assigned to this case. Because there was something more to the young woman's death. I could feel it, and I had to find out what it was. Chapter 4. "Good morning, Tessa," Damien said with a smile. "Do you want another pumpkin spice latte or your usual today?" "How about both?" I pushed back my jacket's hood, revealing a messy braid and damp hair. I hadn't been able to sleep last night. The image of the poor woman's body was stuck in my mind. "You're going to give yourself heart palpitations with all that caffeine." I waved off his concern and handed him $15. "I need it. I couldn't sleep last night, and I have at least a dozen errands to do." Damien's face filled with concern. "Is it because of the murder? It's near your apartment, right?" I nodded, watching as he rang me up, then grabbed 2 mugs to begin brewing the drinks. I saw the body from my window before the police arrived and blocked the view. She looked so young, younger than me, and she was so pale. Damien set down the mug he was holding and sighed. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "They still have the area blocked off and detectives are still there, except one." "How do you know that?" "He was in here 2 days ago, remember? The guy covered in tattoos." I asked, and after a moment of thought, he nodded in acknowledgement. Damien steamed the milk for the lattes as he said, "Very nice guy, though I didn't realize he was a detective. Didn't get that vibe from him. But then again, you can never assume. That's what my mom always says." "Oh, how right she is, Damien," I thought. I gulped down my guilt, knowing what I was about to say would be an outright lie. But I couldn't tell him the truth. I didn't want to lose one of the few friends I'd made, all because I couldn't keep a secret. "If you see that guy again, can you tell me? He's a friend of a friend. My friend lost his phone last week and has been trying to reach him but can't remember his number." "Sure, no problem. No one knows phone numbers these days," Damien added with a smirk, and handed me the pumpkin spice latte. I headed over to my favorite spot, took a big sip, reveling in the taste of pumpkin and cinnamon. Damien called me over a few minutes later to get my regular, a quad shot latte and milk extra hot. "What other errands do you have to run on a Saturday? Shouldn't you be writing or, I don't know, relaxing after you saw a dead body?" Damien asked. I knew he asked out of concern, but I didn't want to face the fact that it scared me to be in my apartment, even with George present. I had magic running through my veins. Would that make me a target? I knew nothing beyond the fact that one of my ancestors had had children with an other being somewhere down the line. It was the only reason a human had magical abilities, and it was rare. I only knew of 5 other people, legitimate people, not silly psychics and mediums on TV, that were like me, and only one of them could see fairies. All the same, it was comforting to know that I wasn't alone, but I wondered if that was a good thing, considering how close I lived to another worldly portal that might have spit out a dead body for all to see yesterday. "Hey, Damien, do you think it'd be a good idea if I broke my lease and moved to another apartment complex? Do you have an extra $2,000 lying around for the fee of breaking said lease?" he called from behind the counter. No, I do not. Then I'd advise buying a shitload of pepper spray bottles, knives, and at least 3 tasers to be on the safe side, Damien concluded and went back to wiping down the counter. I pressed the palms of my hands against my eyes, trying to get rid of a growing headache, but to no avail. Thoughts of telling my parents about the murder made my anxiety burst, knowing they'd want me to move, and that they'd happily give me $2,000 to break the lease. But did I want to? I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The logical thing to do was to move, if I could afford it. I was lucky to have my parents that were talented artists, and people paid big bucks to own their artwork. Tessa, heads up about that guy we were talking about, Damien declared, and a second later the bell on the door sounded. I sat up, nearly knocking one mug off my lap, but saved it before burning myself. I placed the mug on the coffee table beside my chair and spun around to see the vampire ordering another Americano. I raised my hand and waved, trying to get Damien's attention. After multiple failed attempts, he finally looked up. "Oh, by the way, my friend Tessa wants to talk to you. She knows a friend of yours. She's over there," Damien said with a grin, pointing in my direction. The vampire turned to see me waving at him, this time more subtly, and suppressed a laugh. He gave Damien a $5 tip, waited for the Americano to brew, and walked over to my corner, coffee in hand. The vampire settled into the chair across from me. "So you're Tessa O'Hara, I take it," the vampire finalized, his eyebrows arched in interest. "How do you know my last name?" I asked, already suspicious. "Jefferson Beck told me about you," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. I rolled my eyes at the werewolf's name. Jefferson was the alpha wolf of the Bethesda pack, and he loved to gossip about anyone and everything under the sun. "Of course Jefferson told you." "He said nothing negative about you. On the contrary, he had nothing but nice things to say. It's smart to befriend the other beings in town, by the way. Makes you seem less suspicious." My parents came up with the idea when we moved to Salem, Massachusetts, after the complete and utter failure at my third elementary school in another state. "I'm guessing they chose Salem because it's infested with other beings and you wouldn't feel left out?" he asked, intrigued. "Yes, and they found a coven there as well. Overall, I'd say it worked out." "And now you're here." "I wanted a fresh start," I muttered. There were far too many bad memories in Salem, even though there were many more great ones. The terrible ones stuck out, and as they piled up year after year, I knew Salem couldn't be my forever home. I needed to be in an enormous city away from prying eyes. I cleared my throat and put on a smile. "What's your name?" "My name is Thomas Bloodsworth, but please, just call me Bloodsworth." "That sounds like a name a goth vampire would have, but you're what, a punk rocker?" I asked, looking him over. Today he wore black Doc Martens, a Tiger Army t-shirt, and black jeans. Bloodsworth didn't have the zinc sunscreen on his nose, but he had his wide-brimmed hat and his long trench coat to keep out the sunset's rays. "If that's what I look like to you, then that's what I am." I leaned back in the chair. "So you're that kind of vampire?" Bloodsworth snorted in amusement. "What does that mean?" "You're the kind of vampire who changes their look every decade because you're so old people find you off-putting. Like you're not telling the truth about something, but they don't know what, so they fear you." "It's fairly accurate, but I've been dressing like this since punk rock was a thing. I'm not a poser." Bloodsworth winked at me, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Not with a shirt like that. Hardly anyone knows about that band, which is a shame, I might add." Bloodsworth leaned back in his chair and took a long sip of his coffee before asking, "How many vampires have you known? You seem to know a lot about us." "Oh, only a handful. My first experience was with the high school librarian. She said they turned her before the American Revolutionary War, but she doesn't remember much else. And the others? They were in Salem, I said simply. Only one of them was, let's just say, stereotypical. My parents' coven quickly got rid of him before he could hurt anyone. He was much older than you, I suspect. He almost got away, but they caught him on the edge of town with a woman tied up in the back seat. I shuddered at the thought of being a meal for a vicious vampire. "How old do you think I am?" he asked. I bit the inside of my cheek, thinking. If I said a number that made him too old, he'd be offended. But if I said a number that made him too young, he'd also be offended. Vampires were touchy to deal with when it came to their turning dates. "I'd say 300 years, I squeaked. Bloodsworth threw back his head and laughed. That's closer than anyone's ever guessed before. I'm 1 year shy of being 500 years old. My mouth dropped. I was 200 years off, but he didn't act like a nearly 500-year-old vampire. From what I'd heard, the older the vampire, the more stoic, closed off, and old-timey they were. But not Bloodsworth. He acted like he was 30 years old, max. Speaking of ages, how old are you? I'm 22, fresh out of college. You're 22, and you already have an advice column? That's impressive, even if you think it's a waste of your journalism degree. My eyes darkened. How do you know that? I looked into you after my conversation with Jefferson. So now we have a dead body that's appeared near the otherworldly portal, which just happens to be close to the apartment building where Tessa lives. We didn't see Drusel this time, but we've now met George, the ghost in her closet, and of course we've met Bloodsworth, who, and I've read the book, but even just from this little bit, we know that he's going to become a major part of the story, and he isn't your typical vampire. If you're interested in purchasing your own copy of Obsidian Murders, which I definitely recommend, as I'll only be doing one more reading from the work, you can find Nicole's work on Amazon. You can also find links to her work on her YouTube channel, Nicole's Bookish Nook. I'll leave that information in the description box down below. If you would like to help out yours truly, I also have an Amazon link to my wish list where I've listed books, book murdering supplies, and just some fun things if you would like to help a girl out. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed the reading and following along as we meet Tessa and the different individuals she sees. Until next time, remember, be safe, be well, and big hugs.